Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for listening to the best Houston sports podcast. Well, it continues to be a sad year for some of our Astros favorites. We've lost Jimmy Wynn, Bob Watson, and Joe Morgan. This week, we added former Astro player and coach Denis Menke to the list, who passed away at age 80 years old. Menke, who was primarily a middle infielder, had 2 stints with the Astros as a player, the first one from 68 to 71. When he made 2 All-Star teams, he was part of the Joe Morgan trade in 1971. And then the Iowa Farm Boy briefly came back in 74 before retiring. In today's show, I've got a special guest on the line who got to know Menke when he returned to the Astros in the mid-'80s to be their hitting coach. Many of you will remember former Houston radio personality Jerry Trupiano from his many years at KTRH in the 70s and 80s. He also called the Rockets, Oilers, Astros, World Hockey Association, Houston Aeros, and Southwest Conference games over the years. Great to have you back with us, Jerry. Can you tell us how you got to know Denis Menke?
When I was with the Astros, Denis was the hitting coach, and he had the perfect temperament to be a hitting coach. He was sort of a quiet guy, a listener, and could get his point across without being overbearing. I just thought the world of the guy. I'm sorry it was, when the years passed, you sort of lose touch with people, and he was a guy that I enjoyed being around. I'm sorry for his loss and for his family.
You kind of got to go to mass with him, right? And with a few of the other Astro people when you were calling the games for the Astros, right?
Yeah, we had a group that would go to mass. The first year was Matt Galante and Dennis and myself, and then the next year, with my 2 years at the Astros. The next year, they brought in Yogi Berra as a bench coach. Yogi would join us on Sunday mornings. It was funny. A couple of times, Yogi had a habit of falling asleep during the service. And I can remember a couple of times when Matt Galante gave him an elbow to wake him up. And one time in L.A., believe it or not, we were joined by Tommy Lasorda. So that was quite a group I was able to hang with for a short time.
Yeah, what a group that was. The young hitters on those mid-'80s Astros teams, Bill Doran, Dickie Thon, Glenn Davis, Kevin Bass. Any idea, how much of a role Menke played with some of those guys?
I can't put an exact measurement on it, if you will. But as a hitting coach, I think one of the things that the successful ones can do is not bring their personality into it, in that they want to change somebody and feel like everybody should be doing the same thing, but analyze what a hitter can do and has been successful doing to get him to the big leagues, and just have the knowledge, have the perception where you can pick out little things when things go astray to get them back into sync. So the last bit of baseball I did was the World Baseball Classic in 2017, and I worked with Marlon Anderson, a former Major League infielder, and we talked quite a bit about hitting. And he brought up Jackie Bradley Jr., who has been playing for the Red Sox, is now a free agent. One of the best defensive center fielders you could ever see, but has had some trouble at the plate. And Marlon, who knows Bradley Jr. pretty well, said that he feels that they were changing the type of hitter that he is, and they tried to make him into something else. But that was something Denis Menke didn't do. He could pick out strengths of hitters, things that make hitters confident, and just fine-tune those to the point where he can get them back into sync.
Yeah, I'm going to get to a guy later on that Menke influenced that's a Hall of Famer, but let me go back to Menke, the player, because I think a lot of Astros fans remember him as the coach. The player goes back for a lot of people a long ways, and when he signed to play pro baseball, the Milwaukee Braves paid him $125,000 signing bonus, which was a huge number back then. He started off as a shortstop and had his first big league home run. It was a grand slam. Along with Ernie Banks, he was one of just 5 shortstops to hit 20 home runs in a season between 61 and 91. So a power hitting shortstop back in those days was even more unusual than it is today. And, Jerry, Menke has a bat in Cooperstown. I love how it got there. Tony Cloninger used Dennis's bat to hit 2 grand slams in a game, so his bat's in Cooperstown.
Tony Cloninger's an old friend who was a pitching coach with the Red Sox for a while when I was with the Red Sox. I didn't know that. I didn't know he used Dennis' bat. when he hit those two grand slams. So a couple of good guys there you just mentioned.
Yeah, $125,000 signing bonus. By the way, it doesn't sound like a big deal now, but it was a big deal back then, like I said. And over the course of his Astros career, Menke played 6 different positions at one point after he was traded to the Astros. Joe Morgan got hurt. Menke replaced him at second base. And, Jerry, he played so well, they considered moving Joe Morgan to the outfield. Can you imagine if Joe Morgan ended up in the outfield after the first couple of years?
I think Dennis is the only player in Major League history to have played 162 games at all 4 infield positions.
He was so versatile.
By the way, when you mentioned his signing bonus of $125,000, another Milwaukee signee, Bob Uecker, said his signing bonus was $8,000, but that's all his dad could afford to pay the Braves.
Yeah, that sounds like you. I've been watching old Mr. Belvedere reruns recently, so it's funny you mentioned you. We just lost Joe Morgan the last few months. Did the Joe Morgan trade with the Reds, which included Menke, seem as lopsided as it does now, Jerry?
I was living in St. Louis at that time, and it from what I remember, from you could gather as an outsider, I think it was a fairly controversial trade. You know, when you trade away a guy that winds up in the Hall of Fame, it always seems to be very controversial. And isn't it something in 2020? You mentioned the people we lost who have a background with the Astros, but I mean Lou Brock, Bob Gibson, Tom Seaver, Al Kaline, Dick Allen, Richie Allen, who should be in the Hall of Fame, just the other day passed away. It's been a tough year in baseball circles.
Yeah, Whitey Ford, add him to that list.
Whitey Ford, you're right.
Did you get to know Joe Morgan at all? I know you and him were only in Houston for his second stint in 1980, if I remember right.
No, the only time I ever talked to Joe Morgan, going back to 2003, I was a broadcaster for the Red Sox. Game 7 of the American League Championship Series. Grady Little, the manager of the Red Sox, Pedro Martinez coming off the mound in the 7th inning with a 5-2 lead. Pedro, Hall of Famer. The strength of the 2003 Red Sox in the postseason was their bullpen. So he figured he was done. He would pound his heart, point to the sky to salute his deceased father, goes into the dugout, and Grady Little goes to him. And managers and coaches get the big bucks for making the tough decisions. And you never ask a competitor to compete. He asked Pedro if he could go out there one more inning, and Pedro said, sure. But records show that after so many innings or so many pitches, Pedro's effectiveness would decrease. And again, the strength of the team that year in the postseason was the bullpen with Alan Embry and Mike Timlin and others. So Pedro goes back out there, gives up 3 runs. It's 5-5. And Joe, who was in the booth next to us, leans around the glass and tells me the worst managerial decision I've ever seen in my life. And I had said, and it made Grady Little mad because I was on a documentary for ESPN talking about it a year or so later. I never second guessed on the air, but you have to bring up, if you're going to be true to your listeners. I brought up, I said, this is either going to be a great, and I mean, it's Captain Obvious. It's going to be a great move, or it really has the potential to backfire. Again, my conversation with Joe Morgan leaning around the glass saying, worst decision I've ever seen by a manager.
Yeah, Joe never got, in my opinion, the respect that he deserved as an analyst. He was really good on ESPN. And I got a couple more notes on Menke I want to get back to. He played in the 72 World Series with the A's and the Reds. He hit a home run off Catfish Hunter to help win Game 5, had 29 chances at third base without an error in that series. I know as of 8 years ago, that was still a record of chances without an error by a third baseman in the World Series. A's manager Dick Williams, Jerry, he said that at the time, he said, quote, I didn't know Sparky Anderson imported Brooks Robinson for the series. That's high praise.
That's pretty high praise indeed. Pretty high praise.
After Menke requested a trade back to Houston in 1974, he retired as an Astro July 10th, 1974. I love that date because it's actually my 3rd birthday. And that brings me to something you and Menke have in common, Jerry. he finished the season, and I've never heard this. He finished the season doing radio and television for the Astros that year in '74.
I did not know that. And he would have been pretty good at it. He was well spoken, sort of a quiet guy, but knew the game. So I could see him being a success. But then he wound up. He went to some other clubs, Toronto and the Phillies as a hitting coach and a bench coach. I think in Toronto, he was a baseball lifer, and those are the kind of guys you really enjoy being around. And I got to be honest, in today's baseball, those are the kind of guys that are being pushed to the side, and it's sad to see. It really is.
Yeah, I'm going to go over some of the teams that he coached with because it was a few of them. But he coached Paul Molitor in the minors. Molitor says Menke made him better at the plate. He said, quote, Dennis made me more of a stand-up hitter, less power, but with more consistent contact. After he had me close my stance more, and everybody remembers that Molly stance that was closed. That was Denis Menke, Jerry.
Paul Molitor, I believe, is still the only man ever to have a 5-hit game in the World Series. He did that for the Milwaukee Brewers in 1982 against the Cardinals. A Hall of Fame player and a guy you hated to see come up with people on base. And even though he didn't have a whole lot of power, he could find the gaps and he could put the ball in play. Something that's sadly lacking in the game today. So if he credits Denis Menke, that's high praise right there because Molitor's now in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, there was a quote that I ran across also, Mickey Mantle saying the rest of the Astros could learn how to hit the opposite field from Denis Menke. And this is the quote that it really blew me away. As a player, he was once described in a 1963 Sporting News article as, quote, the greatest prospect to come out of the Iowa cornfields since Bob Feller. So that's how well they thought of Menke coming up. And maybe he did live up to those expectations, but he finishes with 101 home runs, a couple of all-star appearances. He gets a top 15 finish for MVP one year. And then, as you said, Jerry, 21 years in Major League Baseball coaching with the Blue Jays, Phillies, Reds, and of course the Astros. He passed away at 80. He's pretty much done it at the age of 60. You would think, I would have thought anyway, Jerry, he would have lasted longer than that because he was pretty well respected as a hitting coach.
Yeah, very well respected. He probably walked away at the age of 60 and spent a lot of time on the golf course and was well deserved after putting in all those years in baseball. Again, the baseball lifers, if you're around the game, and if you're around guys like Jimmy Reese with the Angels and Johnny Pesky with the Red Sox, Wayne Terwilliger with Minnesota, you get to know some of those baseball lifers. It's just like a font of information and the history of the game, and hear people tell stories about playing against some of the greats. It was one of the thrills of my life to spend so much time in Major League Baseball, getting to know those guys and sitting around and listening to scouts talk about the game. Man, oh man, what an education. Yeah,
great that you got to know Denis Menke, and just a sad loss. And, have you noticed how many legendary coaches we lost this year? This week we lose Fred Akers.
Yeah.
That's another big one. And Jerry, let me run through the list. In 2020, Don Shula, Billy Tubbs, John Thompson, Lute Olson, Lou Henson, John McNamara, Pat Dye, Eddie Sutton, Jerry Sloan, Jim Fry, and, of course, the local legend here, Bill Yeoman. It's an incredible list.
This year can't get over soon enough. I mean, this has been, of course, with the pandemic and everything, but losing so many greats from the sports world, it's unbelievable. And losing, I mentioned Bob Gibson and Lou Brock. I grew up in St. Louis, and those were the guys you saw growing up and watching, and you tried to emulate them when you went out to play wiffle ball. And we've lost so many great ones. And you wonder how the game is going to survive without the guy. Again, I refer to them as baseball lifers. The computer crowd in this day and age, thinking they can run a game via the computer. It's not the same game, unfortunately.
Yeah, let me ask you, because you grew up in St. Louis. You were with KMOX back then. Did you get to know those guys? Did you get to know Lou Brock and Bob Gibson?
Not well, because when I was at KMOX, I was a producer behind the scenes. As a matter of fact, the first major league player I ever talked to was Bob Gibson. Well, I take that back. It was Joe Torre, because Harry Carey asked me to go down and get a guest for the postgame show, and it was Joe Torre. And after I got Torre to the interview room, I tried to find my way out of the bowels of Busch Stadium, and I got lost. And who do I run into? Bob Gibson, and he always heard that Gibson was this gruff, tough guy on the mound, which he was. But I asked him, and he helped me, get out of the ballpark. And then years later, when I got to the Astros, and then to the Montreal Expos in the National League, I had the chance to visit with Gibson and Brock and interview them, and guys like Red Shandies and Ozzie Smith and Terry Pendleton, and had Willie McGee with the Red Sox. He came over to the American League, so I got to know those guys professionally. Didn't know them well, but knew them professionally, where you could sit around and talk baseball with them.
Yeah, what a list you just mentioned there. McGee, super underrated. I love watching Willie McGee play. You look back at his stats, and they were darn good. And before we go, I got to ask you, because you mentioned Jackie Bradley earlier, and you still live up in the Boston area. I know you still follow the Red Sox. The Astros, that's a name that's been connected with them. I don't know what the latest scuttlebutt is with Jackie Bradley, but if Springer goes, which it looks like it's just about a done deal, they need a center fielder. What do you think of Bradley, and what are you hearing up there?
He is one of the best defensive center fielders I've ever seen. I'm not sure of the bat. I'm not sure about the consistency. Maybe he needs a change of scenery to find some consistency at the plate. But they've gone through a number of hitting coaches here. I think it's the case of being the opposite of a Denis Menke. I think it's the case of people tried to tinker with him too much and change his style. If you've had success, even at the collegiate level, and you bring that to the big leagues, if somebody's had success with it, why mess with it? See if it works. Let it work through it. But sometimes the egos of coaches get in the way, where they feel they have to prove their worth by changing people. But I tell you what, there's no question about the glove of Jackie Bradley. He is Gold Glove caliber.
And he's the kind of guy you think Houston would take right in, as a good guy, liked in the community?
Oh, yeah, very much so. Very much so. A class act, yeah.
Well, it is great to catch up with you. Unfortunately, it was about the passing of Denis Menke and some of these other greats that we've seen over the last year, but sure fun to catch up with you. And hopefully 2020, 2021 is going to be a little bit better than this.
If it's worse than this, folks, I'm getting into a bunker and not coming out.
Well, thanks for doing this. Just a reminder to everybody that's listening, if you're a regular, not a regular, we need your feedback, suggestions, questions, topics. Just message us through Twitter, Facebook, email, info@houstonsportstalk.net. We'll have the Texans postgame on Sunday as usual with my co-host Stephen Kerr. But before we end this thing, let's hear from Denis Menke, a piece of an interview from a few years ago.
Once I got into the pros, and I was anxious to play. Let's face it, I was 17 years old, out of high school, went down to Midland, Texas my first year, ran across my old roommate, Tony Cloninger, and we were both 17, so we really kind of grew up together. We roomed together for a lot of years and came up to the big leagues about the same time, which was really strange. Here's a boy from North Carolina. He was a cotton boy, and here I'm from Iowa, corn boy, so it was kind of opposite of what it should be.
Well, you made your mark, obviously, in the minor leagues, and the Braves brought you up for opening day in 1962 on the road, I believe. What was that like? You think back to getting to the bigs with the Braves.
Like I said, all the big stars that they had, and, to be able to be a teammate of Aaron and Matthews and Spahn, it's something that when you've been in the organization, you get to know about these guys. You read about them, and all of a sudden you're on the same field with them, and I'm saying, wow. This is really something.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Don't forget to follow Houston Sports Talk on Facebook and Twitter. Subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, the Google Podcast app, or the Stitcher app. You can support us by giving us a 5-star review on iTunes or by telling your friends about us. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.